I beg you, Brandon, don't tell me you're counting down the hours till you can relax in your red silk and Pinot Noir cabin. Who else is doing that? My breath caught in my throat as the words escaped reverberating off the icy marble walls of our Manhattan restroom. Everything came to a halt for an instant, as if the city had stopped holding its breath in sync with me. Hi there, I am Jessica Miller, about 35 years old. As the financial controller for a highly competitive tech company on Madison Avenue, I am known for my decisiveness and respect among executives. I am the go-to person for explaining complicated equity reconciliations in simple terms. At night, though, I'm the wife of a guy whose undisclosed secrets illuminate my phone screen in a way that I can't turn off. The more time I spend staring at those luminous words, the more I begin to suspect that my entire existence has been a fabrication constructed on flawless spreadsheets and kind smiles at business parties. That morning, I had woken up early, fidgety. Prior before sunrise, the sky beyond our penthouse windows retained its bruised purple tone. Brandon remained in bed, wrapped in our luxurious covers, his breaths measured and steady as if he were unconcerned about anything. His iPhone, which was hooked into the marble counter, started flashing as I stood at the double vanity sink toothbrush halfway to my lips. And there it was, a sneak peek at an unwelcome message. Looking forward to the cabin, the crimson satin. This is the Pinot Noir. The clock is ticking. On the spot, my hand froze. There was more to it than that. The tone was the one. Comfortable, light-hearted, close. A tone that had been months since I had heard from him. For an instant, it seemed as though my whole being had evaporated, as if I had detached from my own identity and was observing an unfamiliar woman in a cream silk robe attempting to make sense of the fissure in her reality. Outside Fifth Avenue, traffic began to throb and honk, signaling that the city was waking up as usual. However, within our flat that morning was anything from ordinary. All of a sudden, everything that had happened before the late-night business dinner, the closed laptop screen, Brandon's facial expressions as I grabbed for him in bed became crystal clear. It was hard for me to believe. Jessica, don't be dramatic, I reminded myself again and over. Individuals float. Balancing a family may be challenging. You've been putting in full-time hours. Perhaps he's simply exhausted. However, for months, my stomach had been screaming. Now I knew I wasn't crazy. All it took was one message on a closed screen. Wow, I was completely correct. At that very second, my once idyllic existence in Manhattan began to unravel, and in that short second, it hit me. I'd sooner set fire to everything than waste another day trying to ignore reality. I wish I could tell you that that morning I shouted demanded answers and pulled off my wedding ring as I smashed the phone against the wall. But that was not the case for me. As an alternative, I remained fixated on that lone illuminated notice until the screen went dark. I followed that by gargling with water, styling my hair, and donning a blue sheath dress as if it were protective armor. As if nothing had happened, they strolled out into Manhattan. Greetings, I am Jessica Miller, the number 35. From upstate New York, I was the type of child who knew her multiplication tables by heart before she ever started elementary school. One of the city's most rapidly expanding software firms, D&H Technology, employs me now as their financial controller. Excel spreadsheets, reports on liquidity, and reconciliations of cross-border equities make up my days. When I talk, I use phrases like pipeline revenue, asset rollover risk, and hedge fund exposure. Everyone thinks I'm sharp, spot on, under constant command, Yet the reality, recently I've been experiencing the sensation that my existence is like a glass skyscraper dazzling on the front, but within resonating with nothingness. My spouse, Brandon Miller, was instrumental in creating that illusion. The age of Brandon is 38. My ideal summertime companion would be a tall, dark-haired man with dazzling blue eyes. Working for a Park Avenue digital media powerhouse, he oversees marketing efforts. When people meet him, they all remark, "He's so charming." Indeed he is. He's the one who knows just what kind of wine will be sure to please the CAO's wife, and who delivers handcrafted drinks to the celebration. I'll never forget the night he stood atop a brownstone in Brooklyn at midnight, reading the words to Elton John's Your Song, while I sobbed uncontrollably. That guy is still with me, but recently, he's felt really distant. His return home time has been extended, moved closer to the bed's edge, and began to sleep there. Acting as if his phone had nuclear codes, he began to protect it. However, what's even worse, he persisted in getting my excuses. For the time being, up till the message came, Sophie Carter is another option, a total of 39. Beautiful in that self-assured, angular manner. Several prominent Manhattan corporations employ her as an HR consultant. We were classmates at Columbia University, a loose circle of acquaintances, yet enough to meet for campus coffee trade, study notes, and discuss internships. It has been years since we last saw each other. However, her name is now flashing on my husband's phone. She is also married. With regards, Eric Carter, number 42, an experienced senior site supervisor specializing in construction management. He stands at a respectable height and has the physique of a man who can effortlessly lift heavy beams. Eric is the type of person who has a soft place for dogs and vintage vehicles, and he likely has calluses on his hands. This dude is very sturdy. It appears that this man constructs long-lasting items. He too is in the dark about his spouse's hidden secrets, just like I am. Our narrative extends beyond the skyscrapers of Manhattan and into the Catskill Mountains, the setting for Brandon and Sophie's clandestine weekend getaway. Somewhere we'd gone before, a rustic lodge featuring a crackling fire, expansive windows revealing the surrounding pine forests, and gentle mist. I believed that was our sacred spot. However, my marriage is going to crumble at this very moment. Furthermore, I am about to experience something completely new. The inability of my spreadsheets to protect me from the impending disaster. In hindsight, I see that the indicators were ever present. The fissures began as little fissures like hairline fractures that ran across our lives. Brandon was the one who initially put in extra hours. As a marketer, he often works late into the night on things like client dinner preparation and pitch decks. I wanted to convince myself of that. The reasons, however, began to mount. On a Tuesday night, he returned home at around 1 a.m, accompanied by an unfamiliar scent of cedarwood perfume and whiskey. Something about a supper with a partner was murmured by him. I wanted to know who was there, but he couldn't recall. It was nothing to me. Simply said, that's the way love works, isn't it? You safeguard the narrative you have crafted. Next, there was his mobile device. In the beginning, he would just leave it laying about, lit up like Christmas lights with the alerts flashing. However, I overheard him change his password in the kitchen one night. We went from 4 digits to 6. Out of nowhere, he began to bring it everywhere he went. Into the shower, into the storage room, no matter how often he walked outside, even to carry the garbage downstairs. Minor issues started to bother me. Under the warm light of our living room lamp, his laptop would open effortlessly. Now I needed a fingerprint that I didn't have. I noticed that the envelopes containing my new bank statements are thicker than normal. At the very moment that I went by, he would immediately shut his browser. And if I inquired as to his reading material, he would simply shrug. Things related to sports, he would claim. The only catch is that Brandon isn't even a sports fan. An Uber receipt was discovered in his coat pocket one night, Thursday at 11:45 p.m., a trip from Midtown to Greenpoint. His office is far from Greenpoint, alternatively ours, or the local watering holes frequented by his co-workers. The fee was costly and the travel was long. He looked at me as if I had just accused him of murder when I confronted him. He remarked, "Jess, you're acting paranoid." A work drop-off was taking place, a customer's location. The client's name eluded him, though. Even now, the address eludes him. Then the pain in my chest started to radiate outward like ice. The awkwardness of our utter lack of conversation was the most distressing part. Not the boisterous altercations. Neither of us screamed, nor did we throw plates. Our communication simply ceased. While we were eating, he smiled at texts on his phone that he wouldn't show me. It seemed like he couldn't see me sometimes when he looked at me. On top of that, I began to experience a sense of unimportance. Looking up at the city lights scattered over our ceiling would keep me awake on certain evenings, curious as to whether he was still there, laying next to me, or had departed. I had an inclination to peek. However, I was hindered by another aspect, the one that want to maintain faith in our relationship, until one text message on his phone broke through all of my excuses. Since a wife who writes to her husband about Pinot Noir and crimson silk, you won't find an explanation for it in any spreadsheet. That morning, I had no intention of checking his phone. It is my solemn claim. I never was one of those spouses who monitored her husband's whereabouts or read his private texts. However, it was determined otherwise by the cosmos fate or just horrible happenstance. I observed Brandon's iPhone illuminate on the marble counter as I stood in our bathroom holding the toothbrush in my other hand. Here is a brief overview, a solitary string of words that shattered my whole existence. Looking forward to the cabin, the crimson satin. This is the Pinot Noir. The clock is ticking. What really struck me like a brick wall wasn't the words themselves. I felt a deep connection. The little jabs, the familiar ease. Her expression as she stated, counting down the hours. To someone who knows everything about you, who has touched your most vulnerable spots. They were the phrases you would use to describe them. My fault, too. It seemed as if my whole being was trembling. In my ears, I can hear a buzzing sound. The most horrible aspect of it all was hidden behind the terror. Relief. Reason being, I had been ignored by my stomach for months. At last, I realized I wasn't going mad. As I placed the toothbrush on the marble sink, my palms were chilly. I was the one who locked his phone. No, that was unnecessary. I was already gazing at the reality. Brandon had been unfaithful to me. Whatever she was planning something with him. Regarding the cottage we used to refer to as ours, we celebrated our anniversary at the very same Catskills cottage 2 years ago, where we used to sit sipping bourbon and fantasizing of purchasing a piece of upstate real estate. Here is where he once said we'd establish a solid foundation upon which to develop our professions, and perhaps a family in the future. Wow, that weekend slipped my mind. The fresh piney breeze, the way the stars appeared like shattered gems set against the pitch-black sky. The gentle tone of Brandon's love confession, that lodge suddenly seemed numb. All of a sudden, it was no longer our domain. Theirs was the spot, as if by magic. It felt like all we had done was put up a front. The company meals, the benefit galas, photos taken on the rooftop with a smile for Instagram. Everything was a lovely mask for the truths he hoped I would never learn. Unexpectedly, I remained composed. That was not the time. On the contrary, a chilling clarity descended onto my consciousness, just like when I come across a nonsensical amount while trying to balance a multi-million-dollar ledger. Simply said, that is my identity. A lady who notices the inconsistency and uses it to uncover the truth. Thus I dried my face, straightened up my lipstick. Brandon was standing in front of the bedroom mirror, straightening his tie as I emerged from the restroom. He looked over at me and grinned as if nothing had happened. I had just seen the disintegration of our marriage, and he had no idea. After speaking, he coughed. This next weekend, I will be leading a client retreat in Connecticut. I will not return home until Sunday evening. With my voice flat, I gazed at him. Keep a coat on hand. Evenings there are chilly. Nodding, he seemed completely unaware. Yet when he averted his gaze, a novel idea crashed into my head. Everyone knew about this, not just Brandon and I. Another individual was also deceiving others. Consequently, I returned to the restroom and sat on the closed seat of the toilet. And I went ahead and entered a name into Google that I hadn't given any consideration to for a lifetime. Hello, my name is Sophie Carter. Surrounded by others, she stood there, an expertly crafted LinkedIn profile, expert in human resource management, radiant grin, a leader in strategic people operations, unionized with Eric Carter, manager of construction sites, number 42, architecture that is environmentally friendly, hailing from Brooklyn, just one happy family portrait. A married couple, I had no clue their worlds were going to collapse, and at that same second, it hit me. I couldn't just disregard this, since nothing stays concealed forever. Additionally, this one was on the verge of destroying everything. I don't remember much of what happened after that. Hair makeup and the clicking of black heels on marble floors were the rituals, but my thoughts had departed from Manhattan. There it was in that cabin again, in the forest once again. I returned to my spouse only to find that it had been months since he had shown me genuine affection through the touch of his hands. As I sat at my glass desk at the workplace, I stared at the two monitors that were displaying columns of figures. Income projections, dividends on stock, income forecasts. However, at this point, all of the figures appeared to have little significance. My marriage was more than just a number on a spreadsheet. It was irreconcilable. By my side on the desk rested my phone. You may have thought it was a black hole with its pitch-black screen. I held the glass in my fingers. I begged myself to stop doing it over and over again. Stay away from other people. Avoid bringing someone else into this misery. However, Sophie's message words continued popping into my mind. Velvety scarlet fabric. The wine known as Pinot Noir. Just a few more hours to go. And Eric Carter sprang to mind. This guy I hardly knew. A guy whose world was going to spin out of control. Consequently, I inhaled deeply. I tapped out some words. Hello, Eric. Personally, I know you have no idea who I am. Hi there, I am Jessica Miller. In my opinion, Brandon, your husband, and Sophie, your wife, are having an affair. Those remarks held my attention for over a minute. I felt as if someone had forced razor blades into my fingertips. The message was erased. Revised it. Again, I removed it. I felt my heart hammering in my ears. Everything in the workplace was unusually silent. It seemed as if my every thought might be heard by everybody. Lastly, I sent the message. Suddenly, nevertheless, I thought I was going to throw up. Sweat coated my palms. Sucking was painfully difficult for me. The time passed. Every passing second seems to drag on forever. At that point, someone rang my phone. A mystery number. I nearly chose not to respond. However, a small part of me recognized the person. His voice was low as I picked up the phone. Not very nice. Is this a joke or what? My eyes were shut. I really hope it is. I said. My communications are here. Images taken from the screen. Various moments, places. Weekend getaway to the Catskills is in the works. A rustic lodge. I am perfectly capable of proving it. On the opposite side, there was complete quiet. After that, a deep trembling breath. So what's your plan? In the end, Eric did ask. My hands hurt from holding my phone so firmly. I am not sure, I said. I simply cannot allow them to go there as if nothing is wrong. Sitting at home and watching them laugh and drink wine like we don't exist isn't an option for me. Still no word. Then Eric whispered, I would like to see your possessions. I was nervous. Would you be open to meeting with me in person? Yeah, was his response. I believe it would be a good idea. Somewhere in the middle of the Catskills and New York was the spot we settled on. A little coffee shop near New Paltz. Before we both hung up, we didn't say much more, as I remained seated, fixated on the image of myself that appeared on the faded screen of my phone. I understood there was no turning back now. I just set off the initial explosive device in a conflict that neither of us want. However, we were both in need. It appeared as though the New Paltz diner had been there since the 1970s. The neon sign that proclaimed home of the best pie in Ulster County fluttered over a little squat structure. The aroma of cinnamon pastries and scorched coffee permeated the interior. In addition, the edges of the Formica tables were chipped, as if they had seen 1,000 secrets before ours. My arrival was ahead of schedule. Way too soon, I snagged a booth on the corner that faced the parking lot and had a window. The plastic menu was being relentlessly drummed by my fingertips. I would look up every few seconds, on the fence about inviting Eric, terrified to death that he would. Before long, I laid eyes on him. Very tall, wide-shouldered kind, putting on a sawdust-dusted blue work jacket, even on a Saturday. He had close-cropped dark blonde hair and a few fine creases around the edges of his eyes, a type of line that forms when one squints into strong sunlight, or when one keeps too many secrets. He entered the building and began to survey the exhibits. When our gazes connected, he nodded briefly, hardly audible. Speak nothing, that was all. He settled into the chair across from me, his large hands flat on the table, slightly curled fingers as if he were ready to strike. At first we were silent. A pleasant but completely unaware waitress came and brought us water glasses and coffee that we had not even requested. To keep my hands stable, I encircled my cup with both of them. My phone was finally pushed across the table. Please look at this. I really need your approval. With his thumb, Eric carefully swiped through the stored screenshots as he took it up. The entire conversation between Brandon and Sophie, the humor, the strategies, the claims made regarding the lodge. He remained silent. However, with each successive message, I noticed the muscle in his jaw quiver. He approached a picture of a bottle of wine with the words, "Reserve Pinot Noir," on the label, and let out a sound that rattled the napkin holder. I assumed she was working late, he said in a rough and low voice. Or when doing yoga, God forbid somewhere else than here. He handled my phone with extreme caution, as if it were an explosive device. We only sat there for a while. A shared sense of destruction unites two complete strangers. With trepidation, I inhaled. I would prefer not to seek retribution, I stated. No one's life is in my sights as I want to yell and curse. All I want is for them to see our faces. I hope they finally understand that they can't run from this anymore. In silence, Eric gazed at me. After then, he gave a single nod. That was his response. Stay calm. Authorities not present. There is no drama. The absolute truth. He caressed his face with a hand. I happen to have an extra key to the cabin, he finally said. I kept it, and Sophie has no idea. furrowed brows arched over. Do you? I see. For the previous owners, I created a portion of the deck, long ago before Sophie and I purchased it. Just in case I've stashed the key somewhere. A secret breath that I had been suppressing finally escaped my lips. So, we arrive first, I remarked. Picture it. Get them to come in and see us standing by. Quiet down against all forms of violence. Make them stare directly at us. Eric half laughed, but it was unfunny. For those who deceive, it's like a sudden intervention. It nearly prompted a smile on my face. I said, indeed. Immediate action for deceivers. His eyes were far away as he slowly nodded. Very well, go ahead and do it. On the other hand, we are known for our meticulousness. We refuse to be compared to them. I choked. I concur. Vibrations reverberated through the coffee cups as a vehicle roared past the glass outside. Sitting opposite from one another in that diner was Eric and me, two total strangers hatching a plan for the most passionate showdown of our lives. We were both against this war. Nevertheless, we were both prepared to see it through to the outcome. We had a strategy as we left the restaurant that day. My heart rate, however, refused to subside, even as I got into my vehicle. With a cloud of rain obscuring the road ahead, it was dreary and damp. I tried to read anything on Brandon's phone, but all I could make out were words, velvety scarlet fabric. The wine known as Pinot Noir, just a few more hours to go. It was as if those words had permanently marked my mind. My phone beeped halfway back to the city. A message from Eric. I should have mentioned anything earlier. We need to have another conversation before we head to the cabin. My heart sank. Simply put, I did not want any more mysteries. Entering the hut in the dark was the last thing I could bear. We settled on a secluded area in Washington Square Park to meet. Fewer than expected people showed there because of the light rain. Some distance away, the fountain made a gentle gurgling. Under the light of the street lamps, the pavement glistened like broken diamonds. With raindrops on his jacket, Eric patiently waited under the bridge. He seemed fatigued, longer in age than he had perceived at the cafe only a few hours prior. I drew closer, wrapping my coat more tightly about me. Another thing, you inquired. Uncertain, he nervously massaged the nape of his neck. He asserted that Sophie and Brandon had more than a professional relationship. She was aware of you. I was taken aback. It was obvious to me that we both attended Columbia University at the same time. However, we were distant. Eric glanced at me. Sophie did not tell me that. All around us, the rain continued to fall gently and steadily. Eric paused to inhale deeply. We had a difficult time last year. Sophie became quite nostalgic and began rehashing old stories. In college, she confessed to me she had romantic emotions for someone, a lady. I felt parched. Eric gulped. You were it, Jessica. My thoughts raced. Am I he? It's really ridiculous. Our acquaintance was vague at best. A few of classes had us. I'm done. Eric kept his voice low. You were the first person, Sophie remarked, who ever made her feel noticed. You were the reason I even got into HR, she continued, considering how well organized you were throughout. Boundless energy, feeling confident even at the age of 21. My gaze fixed on him. I barely felt the rain's coolness on my cheeks. Then Eric continued. The affair wasn't only including Brandon, in my opinion. She may have wished she could have been physically closer to you, regardless of how it was angled. He is the one. Attempting to comprehend what was being said, I shook my head. I can't believe it. That is, however, flashbacks began to leak out. The campus library at all hours of the night. My jokes had Sophie leaning in a little too closely, and she was laughing a bit too hard. When she presented me with a little silver bookmark bearing my initials, I'll never forget it. I had assumed she was only being pleasant when we first met. Right now, after this, I began to doubt. I murmured, "So she's been following me around like a ghost this whole time." Then Eric gave a little nod. "I'm not making excuses for her actions. Yet I believe it is your responsibility to be aware. The way you perceive her could shift as a result. How you address her in our face-to-face meeting." I put my hand on top of my head. I still don't believe it. All of a sudden, this complicates everything. There was kindness in Eric's eyes even when it rained. "My apologies. It was my intention to not catch you off guard." We were silent for a while as we stood in the rain, a flutter of city lights around us. Additionally, a doubt started to take shape in my mind. Did I somehow become entangled in this triangle without realizing it? It seemed like the longest drive of my life on the way upstate. As Eric and I continued to drive deeper into the Catskills, the trees outside the windshield began to morph into shadowy forms. A shimmering mist lingered low over the hills until the rain eventually ceased. It seemed as if everyone was waiting for something to happen, anticipating the explosion of the truth. Tires crunching on wet stones, Eric's pickup roared up the gravel driveway. Suddenly it appeared, that little cottage, beneath the lofty trees' weathered wood beams. The windows mirrored the light gray sky. I could have sworn I saw it in my memory. Even so, different entirely. Since then, things has changed from our escape. It was at the very bottom. Eric turned off the engine. For a few seconds, neither of us budged. He lowered his voice and turned to face me. Am I prepared? Despite feeling like my stomach was about to explode, I nodded anyway. I see. Sure, let's get this done. The cottage had an inside aroma of ancient fires and cedar. The wood flooring were bathed in warm pools of amber light. When Eric turned on a few of lamps, it was everything really tidy. The upholstered sofas. Here we have the coffee table. A pile of wood rests atop the stone fireplace, ready to be lit. It brought up a memory of sitting here with Brandon laughing as we sipped bourbon and fantasized of retiring up here. The memories were all contaminated now. I assisted Eric with setting the scene. A bottle of Pinot Noir, Sophie's favorite, was opened by him. After retrieving 4 crystal glasses, I arranged them neatly on the table. Anyone who came in had no choice but to face us directly. We had 2 seats positioned opposite the entrance to accomplish just that. For a little moment, Eric vanished inside the bedroom. A substantial manila packet was displayed by him upon his return. "Printouts," he whispered, "screen captures, statements from a bank, visual media, regardless of anything." I choked. Very well. Their eyes are telling them the truth. With his elbows crossed across his knees, Eric took a seat across from me. We were no longer embarrassed by our mutual lack of speech. It was the stillness that came from a group of individuals who truly understood one another. Never before had I heard the wall clock tick so loudly. Whispers of wind rustled the leaves of the trees outside. My watch was checked. Here it is 5:53 p.m. They are expected to come at 6, Eric stated. With a nod, I concurred. My chest seemed constricted, as if a rubber band were about to burst. A lower pitch escaped Eric's voice. "What are your predictions for the outcome?" Breathing out carefully, I let out a whiff. "Sophia will weep. Brandon, I'm uncertain. He will likely attempt to avoid it by talking himself into it. Alternatively, you may lose your temper." Eric looked at her with harsh eyes. "Neither of us knows anything to him. He has no clue." I chuckled dryly. I am eagerly anticipating that. Headlights illuminated the cabin windows momentarily at 5:59. After that, Eric and I shared a single quiet glance. Next, we straightened our chairs. Speak nothing, not given any instructions. I am well prepared. Automobile doors banged outside. In the brisk air, voices echoed. Happy laughing. Totally loose. It seemed as if they were coming for a romantic getaway, not to witness the collapse of their lives. It was Brandon's voice that first echoed, and the expression on my boss's face was priceless. Very soon after the front door swung open, Sophie then entered. Her expression became pale as her laughter ceased. Brandon nearly lost control of the present bag when he collided with her back. Looking above her, our gazes locked. The hands of time froze. He lost his grip on the champagne bottle, and it tumbled out of his bag, shattering on the wooden floor and sending frothy bubbles flying all over the cabin. With one hand quickly going to her lips, Sophie blinked quickly. Brandon's cheeks became white. There was a complete silence for what seemed like an eternity. My voice was low, yet slicing like glass as I continued, "I hope you're enjoying your weekend retreat." After that came Eric's voice, low and steady. "Please take a seat." Sophie paused her gaze, flitting to Brandon, as if imploring him to resolve the issue. Brandon clenched his teeth and swallowed forcefully. "Jess, I bet you're not thinking this." I crouched down. Oh, after that critique, the books. Layout of the cabin, the Greenpoint receipts. This wine that she claims to be her favorite. Brandon moved closer. "I need you to pay attention, Jess." I interrupted and said no to that. "Pay attention. I've been duped for months. The truth will be revealed to you tonight." Eric rose slowly and steadily to his feet. "I am Sophie. Jason Carter, who is he?" As a result, Sophie reacted anxiously. "It's my brother, that's who." Eric's voice radiated an icy and intensity. "Why did you claim that a loan for roof repair was the reason for transferring $10,000 to a rehabilitation center under his name?" Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes. "I was hoping you wouldn't be concerned." Eric expressed his disapproval by shaking his head. "No, you were hoping I wouldn't find out. The same way you probably didn't want me to find out." With an urgent tone, Brandon abruptly shifted his gaze towards me. "Jess, it was meaningless. This is my solemn vow. It was only a state of elation, a diversion. I have always loved you." Facing him made my eyes sting. "If the love you're describing takes another woman to the very cabin where you assured me of a future, then I'm not interested." As she sobbed, Sophie covered her face. Eric stared at her as if he were encountering an unfamiliar face. Sinking into one of the seats, Brandon buried his face in his hands. I took out the images and prints from Eric's envelope and spread them out on the table. "Every detail," I said. "The dates, status updates, reservation confirmations for hotels. Everything you two believed you were concealing." As Sophie raised her head, her voice quivered. "I never intended for it to escalate to this point, Jessica. I swear." My voice was hardly audible. "It progressed to the extent that you decided it would." Eric drew nearer. "Sophie, have you heard about the worst part? There was a time when you believed we couldn't handle the truth. Because of our size, you felt we didn't merit your truthfulness." Once again, the room fell into a hushed stillness, broken only by the gentle sound of the clock and the aroma of champagne seeping into the flooring. Curled up in a ball, I crossed my arms. "This isn't a night for getting even. Actuality is the subject. You two constructed your affair on secrecy, and that's the fact. Plus, no secret remains concealed forever." With tears in his eyes, Brandon raised his head. "Please, Jess, please keep going." I opened my mouth to speak, but what came out was different from all the times I had practiced. "Brandon, it's over already." And after what feels like an eternity, I was liberated. I claimed it was finished, but for a long while after that, there was silence. The cabin's air was as harsh as inhaling glass. Brandon leaned forward in his chair, his shoulders sagging and his head hung low. With her breaths coming in irregular patterns and quiet tears rolling down her cheeks, Sophie gazed at the table. With his knuckles becoming white, Eric stepped behind his chair and clutched it fiercely. After removing them off the table, I began to reassemble the evidence by folding it and placing it back into the envelope. My only want was for it to end already, and yet in the end, with a quiver in her voice, Sophie murmured, "I should probably mention something else," she said. As she said, her voice wavered. The envelope was halfway closed when I stopped moving. Eric tensed up. As he raised his head, Brandon's eyes grew redder. "What?" His voice strained with raspiness. The sound of Sophie's forceful gulp echoed across the otherwise silent room. She looked at me, then at Eric, and then back at me again. "Yes, I am expecting a child." It was completely lost on me for a second. The words seemed to float in midair, unable to penetrate. As if attempting to absorb the information, Eric blinked slowly. With all the color drained from his face, Brandon straightened himself and sat up. "Did you say anything?" I crooned, he said. With tears streaming down her cheeks, Sophie nodded. "Last week I discovered it. On Saturday I was going to break the news to you. Then something occurred, though." Her fingers quivered as she cleaned her cheeks. No sound came out of Brandon's lips when he opened and closed it. Finally, with an unfiltered voice, "Is it ours?" A stifled sob escaped Sophie's lips. Her gaze shifted to Eric. Afterwards, we move on to Brandon. "It belongs to Eric," she said. "Sure I am." My friend Brandon and I were really cautious. Regarding Eric and myself, though we weren't. She sobbed uncontrollably when her voice snapped. Eric retreated a step, his fingers fluttering to his lips, as if he were about to pass out. His eyes were large and hollow, and his face was pallid from shock. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Sophie, are you kidding me?" With her voice scarcely audible due to her heavy sobs, she nodded. "I am well aware that this is a catastrophe, and that the timing is wrong, but I just can't hide it any longer." As he raked his fingers through his hair, Brandon shook his head again. "You're telling me that you're expecting his child, right?" As a result, Sophie reacted anxiously. "I apologize, Brandon. This is beyond what I anticipated. To think that I loved you is a complete letdown. I was hoping we might, but She turned to face Eric, her face marred by tears. "My love for you, Eric, has never faded." I felt furious. It felt like being in a maze. "I promise you, even though I did this awful act, my love for you has not faded." It was as if she had transformed into an alien as Eric fixated on her. His speech was almost inaudible. To have a child? "Oh my God, Sophie." Bringing herself closer to him, Sophie sobbed. "I'm not pleading for your forgiveness at this very moment. What I am requesting is that you remain." The truth had to be told, though. Unshed tears sparkled in Eric's eyes. As he rubbed his hands over his face, he looked away. The length of time there was complete quiet made it seem as though it may engulf the four of us. Eventually, Eric got up and started talking. Exactly what occurs next is a mystery to me. At this very moment, I have no idea who you are. But I will treat a child fairly if there is a baby. None of this was requested by the infant. As Sophie wiped her tears, she nodded. "I am aware. Additionally, I appreciate you stating that." As if he were about to collapse in the middle of the cabin, Brandon flinched and gazed at the floor. It seemed like my own ribs may collapse under the pressure of my racing heart. Murmured softly, "Was it all this time that you were trying to conceal a kid as well as an affair?" With her words hushed, Sophie dipped her head. "None of this was on my part. This is my solemn vow. It was never my intention to cause you pain." The sound of my voice was as icy as ice, so it would have been wise for you to avoid my husband. Sadness filled Eric's eyes as he stared at me. "Jess, this is going to alter everything. Repressing a myriad of feelings, I nodded. Yeah, I guess so. And right then and there, our intended conflict for tonight escalated into something more substantial. An innocent life was now precariously positioned. It seemed as if the room had shrunk in size. The hardwood floor was illuminated by the lamp's long shadows, which danced over the champagne that had spilled, and the flower petals that Sophie had let fall. Brandon sat with his shoulders back, hands clasped behind his head, and his elbows resting on his knees. As the sun began to set behind the trees, Eric stepped off to the side and stared blankly out the window. With mascara splotchy over her cheeks, Sophie wiped her eyes repeatedly. I drew a deep breath, in and out. I sensed a solidification occurring within me. A compact folder containing clean white papers was extracted from my luggage. By me, the noise it made as I set it on the table was comparable to that of a gunshot. The sound startled Brandon, and he froze. Gradually, he raised his gaze to meet mine. Just what is it? He spoke in a low, unfiltered voice. I kept looking into his eyes. This is our petition for a dissolution of our marriage. Sophie hardly drew breath. With his eyes expanding, Eric moved away from the window. Quick blinks from Brandon indicated that he was attempting to decipher a language he had never heard before. Oh, please, Jessica, you must not mean that. Sure, we can figure this out. Things have been worse for us. Is treatment an option for us? Please. One time I shook my head, at peace, staying put. Brandon, there is no turning back now. A single slip-up may have been excusable. Yet this, I pointed at Sophie, 2 complete lives shattered, multiple layers of deceit, concealed agendas, and this woman who was meant to be no more than a coworker, with the kid of another guy. During the time when you were secretly pursuing her in our cabin, Brandon came over and grabbed my hand. Just as his fingers were about to brush mine, I yanked it away. The sound of his voice was gnarled. Hello, Jess. I adore you. My mistake is obvious. Keep all we've worked on. Refrain from discarding us. Something ached behind my eyelids. However, I vowed not to cry. The things we worked so hard to create are all gone, I whispered. Because we weren't working together to construct it. You were using your trade secrets to construct it. I interrupted him just as he was about to protest again. You always emphasized the need of trust, and you ruined it. Also, love is a wonderful illusion if it isn't based on trust. In her hands, Sophie cried. Eric observed me respectfully while remaining mute. I removed a pen from the folder after opening it. Every one of our assets has been meticulously recorded and organized. The dwelling, money in the bank, those stocks. Brandon, please don't think that I am attempting to bankrupt you. All I'm doing is attempting to escape. As he shook his head, he fixed his gaze on me. Stop, Jess. This isn't right. At the very bottom of the initial page, I put my signature. As the black ink slid off the pen, 12 years of my existence came to a close. I held the pen out to him. The time to sign is now. Another option is to see an attorney. However, I am finished nonetheless. Brandon opened his lips, but he remained silent. Even though he was on solid land, he appeared to be a guy in danger of drowning. Eric moved in closer and said something. Jessica, you are incredibly strong. A little smile slipped my lips. Not powerful, finally wide awake. Looking across at Sophie, I took a quick inspection. Devastated, she continued to hug her tummy, as if to shield the life developing there. Brandon was the last person I looked at, the man I had once thought would be my partner for life. Then I went to get my stuff. My back was straight, leaving the cottage behind. Deep into the frigid, shadowy night, at no cost, with a last firm thump, the cabin door shut behind me. Also, after all these years, a A sense of relief washed over me. I stepped off the porch into the chilly night air, erasing the scent of ruined champagne and unfulfilled vows. I turned my back on them. On one occasion only, the finalization of the divorce papers occurred 2 months thereafter. Brandon waved his hand. It may have been because he realized that if he waited any longer, more falsehoods would come to light. Or maybe he just realized that I had had enough of acting. I was made to feel at ease by the settlement. The Manhattan condo was mine to keep. My funds, options on my stocks. What I gained from my marriage, nevertheless, was priceless. Take care. A vacation would have been an option. Traveled out of sight for a time, however substituted. Working became my life's mission. Simply said, that is my identity. One who transforms suffering into strength. A lady who brings joy to spreadsheets. However, in this occasion, residing in the business world was not what I want. I despised the idea of working under fluorescent lights, putting in 14-hour days, and feigning amusement at poor jokes in stuffy conference rooms. So, I ventured out on my own. The Miller Financial Resilience Team. The mission of our boutique consulting organization is to assist women in navigating the financial turmoil that frequently follows a divorce, reorganization of asset holdings, rollovers of retirement accounts, the effects of settlements on taxes, cash on hand for unexpected costs. I absorbed every harsh lesson I had ever learnt and used it as the basis for a successful business. A woman in her 40s who had been taken aback by her husband's actions, draining their joint accounts and taking off with a 25-year-old Pilates instructor, was my first client. In an Upper West Side cafe, I sat next to her and listened as her shaking hand cradled a paper coffee cup. During our session, we were able to create a new budget for her. Her credit is again under her control, and she was able to remain in her flat thanks to him. I thought I'd lost everything, but I think I'm going to be okay, she whispered as she embraced me, her eyes filled with sorrow. It was the most satisfying quarterly bonus I'd ever gotten. Reason being, at this same moment, counts I took were making a difference. A long period has passed, and now I was on the same boat. However, despite the success of my new venture, there remained a tiny fragment of my being that want a softer texture, something unrelated to accounting spreadsheets or court documents. Someone, just for me, a long-lost dream resurfaced in my mind, an idea that Brandon would dismiss as impractical and then laugh off. A little cafe bookshop was always my dream. Nestled on a peaceful alleyway, the aroma of freshly roasted coffee beans blending with that of new pages, the brightness of the sun glinting off the hardwood floors, gently humming jazz tunes in the distance. People come in for more than just a cappuccino. They're looking for a little bit of themselves in the merchandise. I decided to take a drive north along the Hudson River one morning, and I discovered the ideal location in a quaint hamlet characterized by brick structures and vibrant flower boxes. I executed the lease on the spot. After a span of 3 months, finally Harbor Light Books and Brew was open for business. Right now, on a daily basis, I change the sign to read "Open." Behind the counter, I make cappuccinos and steam rises from them. Residents read books for hours. Visitors who drop in for scones wind up striking up conversations with complete strangers at the communal table. The store itself has been the site of my financial workshops on occasion, providing support to women as they discover their footing amidst the aroma of cinnamon buns. It's serene. That's great. This is mine. No one now tells me that my goals are too ambitious. I am experiencing them firsthand. Whenever I see a person happy and carrying a book as they leave my home, Now I know I've created something substantial, some truth here, a spot where you can always find healing and fresh starts. Evenings when, after everyone has left and the store is empty, perched outside Harbor Light Books and Brew. I take it easy. I'm holding a steaming cup of chai. In the meanwhile, I stand outside in the rain, watching as headlights whiz by, and I consider how near I was. I abandon myself entirely. I refuse to leave a world where I was being poisoned by lies every day. The lady I once was ponders my thoughts. That person for whom love necessitated giving up something important in life, in order to forgive you, had to put your own truth down. It was safer to remain silent than to raise the tough questions. However, I am no longer she. The reason being that I've discovered that true love doesn't need you to minimize your identity in order to fit into another person's shadow. Sincerity isn't a perk. That's where it all starts. In its absence, love is nothing more than a facade concealed by flowery language and expensive meals. Sometimes I've realized there is no weakness in walking away. That type of strength is unadulterated. It's when you decide to be loyal to yourself, despite a life that doesn't work anymore, despite the fact that they ceased defending you prior to your awareness that hostilities had begun. I get asked all the time whether I'm sorry, in the event that I come to regret departing. If I come to regret setting everything on fire, in addition, I inform them about, no, given that on sometimes, something better can emerge after the fire, something tangible. And the reality is, a few individuals in your life will teach you the ropes of staying put. A few people show up to show you the ropes. On one hand, what you become is shaped by them. Therefore, if you are perusing this, and here you are on the brink of making your own choice, considering staying or going. Alternatively, the question of whether to go, what I want to express is, you should be loved in a way that doesn't need you to delete your own existence. No secret is worth risking your life for. You deserve a life where they are secure. On a daily basis, you should be the one picked, through another individual and on your own. Have you ever overstayed your welcome? How much did it cost you, and what did you learn from it?